Historically, the world saw its first superhero on the 18th of April 1938, when Superman made his first appearance in Action Comics number 1. And at that time, it was an extremely innovative character, different from what the world had seen to date. So much so that he was nicknamed the Man of Tomorrow. This character sparked the first golden age of superheroes that enjoyed great popularity. But times changed and tomorrow passed him by. As the years went by, other comics and characters were making their way, and the concept of the superhero was evolving over time. So, the new stories explored questions like what would happen if the superheroes weren't these perfect beings we believed in? What if they are so powerful that they just don't care about us? Or what would happen if the world's most powerful hero was actually a sociopath? That's why in this video we're going to analyze 3 very important stages of superheroes through the most powerful character of his generation. So get comfortable and get ready to take superheroes very seriously. Remember, if you live in the Mexican Republic and you want to support the channel, you still have a few days to order your The Geek Monitor t-shirts. All you have to do is fill out the form with your information that is in the video description, decide which one you want, and you will receive an email with the payment options. If you've ordered, send your payment receipt by September 30th. That's when we're going to screen print all the t-shirts so that afterwards I can send each of the shirts with a thank you note. To support the channel and get a cool t-shirt, check out the link in the video description. Now let's dive right into the topic, Chapter 1, The Origin and Deconstruction. I don't think there's a person in the world who narrates the birth of Superman better than Grant Morrison, writer of comics such as All-Star, Superman, and Multiversity. In his book Super Gods, he says that the character's first appearance was an unrepeatable virtue that the world had never seen. An explosion of raw power that represented the birth of one of our oldest ideas. He was the modern representation of the powerful mythological gods. However, the public was unaware of it at the time. In fact, I don't think even Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, the original creators of the character, were fully aware of how similar Superman was to other tales from antiquity. But Superman was an immortal champion who was sent to the world by a heavenly father to save mankind. And just like other gods, he had to disguise himself as a mortal man to walk among ordinary people. You might find it incredible that they were not aware of the similarities between Superman and other mythological stories. But the reality is that many ancient cultures that never met each other made similar stories. These are characters that represent the virtues of humans. And that's why Superman and all these heroes of his generation started out as these Boy Scouts. They never made mistakes and were always good. But this slowly changed. While Superman started out as a people's hero and humanist, the character gradually became a marketing tool. A patriotic symbol that seemed to represent the interests of a country, not the world. Did the same happen with other superheroes from this generation? As the years went by, new companies like Marvel Comics introduced us to much more realistic heroes. They had problems in their everyday life and weren't always happy to have powers, or with the responsibility that this entails. Characters that began to pose the idea that superheroes weren't as perfect as we initially thought. As the years passed, DC also began to reconsider the approach they took with their heroes. Because now, for the first time in history, comics were no longer aimed at the children's market, but at adults who grew up with these stories and wanted to read increasingly complex comics. This is when Alan Moore comes into the picture. Turns out in the mid-80s, DC acquired the rights of characters from a company called Charlton Comics, which had gone bankrupt. Characters like Blue Beetle, The Question, or Captain Atom, who had some fans but were left without a company to publish their stories. Alan Moore discovered the purchase and requested DC's approval to write a story featuring the characters. But DC refused, as the story Moore intended to tell would leave their new characters practically unusable or too altered. It was then that Moore decided to make a decision that would lead him to write one of the greatest stories in the world of comics, Watchmen. Moore realized that these Charlton characters represented certain archetypes that superhero stories had been using for decades, and decided to create his own characters based on these archetypes. Blue Beetle was the gadget hero, Question, the urban vigilante of detective stories, Peacemaker, the violent anti-hero, Thunderbolt, the human who reaches the physical and mental peak, Nightshade, the heroine who inherited her mother's mantle, and finally Captain Atom was the super powerful character who seemed further from the other heroes and more akin to the gods. However, Moore did not want to use these archetypes as they were commonly used. He wanted to go further, he wanted to tell a much more ambitious story. And this is when we say that what Moore achieved was the deconstruction of the superhero genre and these archetypes. But what does deconstruct mean? Deconstruction is a concept coined by the philosopher Jacques Derrida, which talks about dismantling excessive loyalty to any idea and questioning the concepts that compose it. For example, if you ask a person what a superhero is, they might talk about a person with powers who fights against supervillains, who always does the right thing. And they probably also think that it's a person who is happy to be a hero. But in the comic Watchmen, Moon tells us that all these ideas we have of what a superhero should be are not always real. That superheroes are very human characters, and as such they can be powerless, paranoid, or sociopathic people. In fact, even Dr. Manhattan, a character that is presented to us as super powerful to such a degree that he distances himself from humanity, and he doesn't care about what happens to us. He is also very human, as Ozymandias is able to manipulate him through his emotions. He, on the other hand, takes this idea that the superhero must save the world to a sick degree, because he generates a whole plan to save the world from World War III, sacrificing millions of people. Deconstruction does not intend to destroy meaning. So, are they not telling us that the concept of the superhero does not exist? It tells us that in life there are no simple solutions or concepts, that every idea is complex and deserves analysis. And that seeing the world in binary terms like good and evil, superhero and supervillain, capitalism and communism is naive. And all these concepts that I just mentioned complement each other. That there is a kaleidoscopic nature in the world that we must accept. And that's what Moore did with the Watchmen story. Sometime later, another story arrived that adapted some of Moore's concepts and made us see superheroes in a completely different way. Chapter 2: The Capitalization of the Superhero. There is a character in Alan Moore's Watchmen comic that is not often explored, who is called Dollar Bill. In the story, he was a hero hired by a chain of banks. Seeing that masked heroes were popular among the people, they wanted to profit from this trend and have their own personal hero, who really had little of a hero and was more like a corporate mascot, like Ronald McDonald, who appeared at press events. Through this character, Moore already presented us with the idea of superheroes as marketing tools, but the boys took this concept much further. Note, this section has spoilers from The Boys Season 1, but not from Season 2 or the comic. The Boys series, which is an adaptation of Garth Ennis's comic, also deconstructs the most common archetypes in superhero stories through the group known as the Seven, which is like the Justice League of this universe. However, just like in Watchmen, the story presents these archetypes from another point of view. A-Train is a speedster addicted to a substance known as Compound B, which gives superpowers to the supers. And he is obsessed with remaining the fastest speedster in the world. Not because he wants to remain a hero, but because he doesn't want to lose his many sponsorships. Black Noir takes Batman's darkness to a ridiculous level. I mean, he's so dark that he doesn't even talk or relate to others. The tip is the hero that everyone laughs at, let's say Aquaman, before Jason Momoa showed up. He's also a rapist who feels more empathy towards dolphins or lobsters than women, but he's never able to do anything to save marine life. Queen Maeve is that super powerful woman everyone imagines in a relationship with the group leader, although secretly she is bisexual and is forced to leave her partner. And Homelander, well, he's that super powerful hero who seems to have the trust of all of America, though secretly he's the worst of them all. A narcissistic egotist who only saves people to feel loved. And he has no problem killing or raping someone simply because he felt like doing it. All of them contrast with the character of Starlight, who is this rookie girl who isn't yet consumed by the system. The series introduces us from the first episode that people with superpowers are irresponsible or outright sociopaths who do what they want without facing consequences. Like Atron running and impaling Robin's body in the first minutes of the series. But why does this happen? The story introduces us to the fact that the supers are essentially owned by a company named 5-Aught, which is the pharmaceutical company that develops Compound 5. And that the superheroes are untouchable, not because they are powerful, with the exception of Homelander, but because they represent profits for the company. So this means that when a super has problems, Vought and all its arsenal of lawyers are there to save their property. However, history also tells us that when a super is no longer profitable, Vought has no problem discarding them. This is best for the company. This is where the series shines the most when it talks about superheroes, tied to the concept of capitalism. Capitalism is an economic system that is based on private ownership of the means of production and on the concept of a free market. But when we talk about capitalism, we usually make two huge mistakes. Thinking that questioning even a little capitalism already makes you a communist. And thinking that there is only one type of capitalism. If we want to measure how capitalist or communist a stance is, we can use a tool called a political compass. According to this graph, the most capitalist views are on the far right, which say that much more freedom and power should be given to private business. On the other side, we have the far left, those who believe that the government should take full control of the economy. However, as Derrida said, life isn't binary. And despite the fact that the vast majority of the world's countries today are capitalist, there is not a single country that is at this extreme. Because history has taught us that pure capitalism without the government regulating issues like monopolies does not benefit people. In other words, the buff guy who believes he can make Coca-Cola obsolete in a purely capitalist system doesn't have a clue about what he's talking about. In the series, Vought is a company that proves to be more powerful than the United States government. We first see it in small displays of power, like when Stilwell blackmails a senator, and then on a larger scale. When the Federal Bureau of Investigation is forced to grant immunity to the company because they found out about the existence of the super terrorists, which makes characters like Homelander indispensable. In essence, what we're seeing here is that a pharmaceutical company, which is Vought, is capitalizing on the power of the supers as if they were weapons. Here they are private property, they are part of the company's assets, and the government can't do anything about it. However, power is not the only thing that Vought capitalizes on. In order to enjoy public acceptance, Vought has to capitalize on concepts such as heroism. And they sell us the idea that the supers are these God-chosen figures who exist to protect us, and in doing so, they also capitalize on people's faith. We see this in all these religious events organized by the supers where they sell super expensive backstage passes. And these are very important so that we don't see characters like Homelander in a dangerous light. That is, he sells us on the idea that he is also a child of God and a believer. Something which is completely untrue, but it helps people not to see him with fear. The series also talks about how concepts such as feminism are used by brands when it suits them, and how, at times, these same brands are in favor of sexual diversity, and at times they are very conservative depending on their interests. Something we can see in real life, with examples like Liverpool selling feminist combat boots when the company covered up a femicide a few years ago so as not to lose Black Friday customers. The point of the series is that everything can be capitalized on, and that brands truly don't have a genuine interest in some struggles. They use them to sell, making themselves conservative or liberal based on trends. There's a moment when Translucent says they're the heroes of the story because they face terrorist gangs, they save the world every day. and he has a point. That is, if you compare the number of people Homelander has saved with the number of people he has killed, he would probably still come out on top even if you include all the people he let die on the plane, simply because it didn't suit him to save them. However, life is not an Excel spreadsheet where saving someone absolves you of killing another. And the series clearly shows us that Homelander is not a force for good in the world, but a person who must be stopped. That is, how much freedom should we give these characters to behave as they wish? Now, keeping this in mind, observe the power some companies have in the world and tell me, how many regulations or limits do you think they should have? It may seem like something out of science fiction, but there are tobacco companies that have sued entire countries for promoting laws that limit cigarette consumption for health reasons. And when International Federation of Association Football organized the World Cup in Brazil, the Budweiser company had them revoke a law that prohibited beer consumption in football stadiums, after several violent incidents were reported. The point is that the concept of private company, capitalism or superhero is not bad in itself. As we said, we can't reduce such complex concepts to such basic archetypes. It's naive to think that any of these concepts is completely positive or negative. Pharmaceutical companies like Big Pharma are necessary to develop new medicines, just as Superman is necessary to defeat Brainiac. But when you realize that Big Pharma spends $1 on research for every $19 it spends on advertising, or that you're Superman, he's a sociopath who's willing to sacrifice people just so he doesn't look bad, well, I think that's when you have to question their role in society or regulate them. So the idea is to take these concepts down from the pedestal we have them on. In the same way that over the years we've questioned the role of superheroes in comics. Don't go yet. If you enjoyed this video essay, I recommend this other one where I also take superheroes very seriously and I link them with social issues. Or this other one where I explain in more detail all the eras of comics. That's all for today. I'm Ku and I invite you to keep seeing beyond the obvious by subscribing to my channel.